driver, who looked rather confounded at finding himself lodged just in the middle of a slough as bad as the Slough of Desmond. For my part, as I could do no good, I kept my seat, and patiently waited the restoration to order. This was soon effected, and all went on well again until a jolt against a huge pine tree gave such a jar to the ill set vehicle, that one of the boards danced out that composed the bottom, and a sack of flour and bag of salted pork, which was on its way to a settler's whose clearing we had to pass in the way, were ejected. A good teamster is seldom taken aback by such trifles as these. He is, or should be, provided with an axe. No waggon, team, or any other travelling equipage should be unprovided with an instrument of this kind, as no one can answer for the obstacles that may impede his progress in the bush. The disasters we met fortunately required but little skill in remedying. The sides need only a stout peg, and the loosened planks that form the bottom being quickly replaced, away you go again over root, stump, and stone, mud hole, and corduroy, now against the trunk of some standing tree, now mounting over some fallen one, with an impulse that would annihilate any lighter equipage than a Canadian waggon, which is admirably fitted by its very roughness for such roads as we have in the bush. The sagacity of the horses of this country is truly admirable. Their patience in surmounting the difficulties they have to encounter, their skill in avoiding the holes and stones, and in making their footing sure over the round and slippery timbers of the log bridges, renders them very valuable. If they want the spirit and fleetness of some of our high bred blood horses, they make up in gentleness, strength, and patience. This renders them most truly valuable, as they will travel in such places that no British horse would, with equal safety to their drivers. Nor are the Canadian horses, when well fed and groomed, at all deficient in beauty of colour, size, or form. They are not very often used in logging. The ox is preferred in all rough and heavy labour of this kind. Just as the increasing gloom of the forest began to warn us of the approach of evening, and I was getting weary and hungry, our driver, in some confusion, avowed his belief that, somehow or other, he had missed the track, though how he could not tell, seeing there was but one road. We were nearly 2 miles from the last settlement, and he said we ought to be within sight of the lake if we were on the right road. The only plan we agreed was for him to go forward and leave the team, and endeavour to ascertain if he were near the water, and if otherwise, to return to the house we had passed and inquire the way. After running full half a mile ahead, he returned with a dejected countenance, saying we must be wrong, for he saw no appearance of water, and the road we were on appeared to end in a cedar swamp. As the further he went, the thicker the hemlocks and cedars became; so, as we had no desire to commence our settlement by a night's lodging in a swamp, where, to use the expression of our driver, the cedars grew as thick as hairs on a cat's back, we agreed to retrace our steps. After some difficulty the lumbering machine was turned, and slowly we began our backward march. We had not gone more than a mile when a boy came along, who told us that we might just go back again, as there was no other road to the lake, and added, with a knowing nod of his head, "Master, I guess if you had known the bush as well as I, you would never have been fool enough to turn when you were going just right. Why, anybody knows that them cedars and hemlocks grow thickest near the water, so you may just go back for your pains." It was dark, save that the stars came forth with more than usual brilliancy, when we suddenly emerged from the depth of the gloomy forest to the shores of a beautiful little lake, that gleamed the more brightly from the contrast of the dark masses of foliage that hung over it, and the towering pine woods that girt its banks. Here, seated on a huge block of limestone, which was covered with a soft cushion of moss, beneath the shade of the cedars that skirt the lake, surrounded with trunks, boxes, and packages of various descriptions, which the driver had hastily thrown from the waggon, sat your child, in anxious expectation of some answering voice to my husband's long and repeated "Halloo!" But when the echo of his voice had died away, we heard only the gurgling of the waters at the head of the rapids, and the distant and hoarse murmur of a waterfall some half mile below them. We could see no sign of any habitation, no gleam of light from the shore to cheer us. In vain we strained our ears for the plash of the oar, or welcome the sound of human voice or bark of some household dog, that might assure us that we were not doomed to pass the night in the lone wood. We began now to apprehend we had really lost the way. To attempt returning through the deepening darkness of the forest in search of any one to guide us was quite out of the question, the road being so ill defined that we should soon have been lost in the mazes of the woods. The last sound of the waggon wheels had died away in the distance. To have overtaken it would have been impossible. Bidding me remain quietly where I was, my husband forced his way through the tangled underwood along the bank, in hope of discovering some sign of the house we sought, which we had every reason to suppose must be near, though probably hidden by the dense mass of trees from our sight. As I sat in the wood in silence and darkness, my thoughts gradually wandered back across the Atlantic to my dear mother and to my old home, and I thought what would have been your feelings could you at that moment have beheld me as I sat on the cold mossy stone in the profound stillness of that vast leafy wilderness, thousands of miles from all these holy ties of kindred and early associations that make home in all countries a hallowed spot. It was a moment to press upon my mind the importance of the step I had taken, involuntarily sharing the lot of the emigrant, in leaving the land of my birth, to which, in all probability, I might never again return. Great as was the sacrifice, even at that moment, strange as my situation, I felt no painful regret or fearful misgiving depress my mind. A holy and tranquil peace came down upon me, soothing and softening my spirits into a calmness that seemed as unruffled as was the bosom of the water that lay stretched out before my feet. My reverie was broken by the light plash of a paddle, and a bright line of light showed a canoe dancing over the lake. In a few minutes a well known and friendly voice greeted me as the little bark was moored among the cedars at my feet. My husband, having gained a projecting angle of the shore, had discovered the welcome blaze of the wood fire in the log house, and, after some difficulty, had succeeded in rousing the attention of its inhabitants. Our coming that day had long been given up, and our first call had been mistaken for the sound of the ox bells in the wood. This had caused the delay that had so embarrassed us. We soon forgot our weary wanderings beside the bright fire that blazed on the hearth of the log house, in which we found S comfortably domiciled with his wife. To the lady I was duly introduced, and, in spite of all remonstrances from the affectionate and careful mother, 3 fair sleeping children were successively handed out of their cribs to be shown me by the proud and delighted father. Our welcome was given with that unaffected cordiality that is so grateful to the heart. It was as sincere as it was kind. All means were adopted to soften the roughness of our accommodation, which, if they lacked the elegance and convenience to which we had been accustomed in England, were not devoid of rustic comfort. At all events, they were such as many settlers of the first respectability have been glad to content themselves with, and many have not been half so well lodged as we now are. We may indeed consider ourselves fortunate in not being obliged to go at once into the rude shanty that I described to you as the only habitation on our land. This test of our fortitude was kindly spared us by S , who insisted on our remaining beneath his hospitable roof till such time as we should have put up a house on our own lot. Here, then, we are for the present fixed, as the Canadians say; and if I miss many of the little comforts and luxuries of life, I enjoy excellent health and spirits, and am very happy in the society of those around me.